The Norman Lear Center is a research and action center at the USC Annenberg School, and its core premise is that entertainment is power, that entertainment makes a difference. You have power, your stories have power, and tonight we're going to hear powerful stories about power that show us who we are and enable writers to show us who we want to be. So what tonight's event asks is the question of you storytellers, what are you going to do with your power? And I hope this helps you play with that question and come up with some answers. And to introduce the Hollywood Health and Society program, which is my privilege to work with and on, I'm going to introduce the amazing director of that program. She and her team are here tonight and do incredible work. Some of you know our work, some of you I hope will get to know it, and it's all free. It's a free service. So to describe it just a little bit more and to get the panel going, please welcome Kate Folb.
Good evening, welcome. Thank you, Marty. We're really glad you're here tonight. This is such an important topic. I'm really excited about it, and I look forward to hearing from all of you later when you decide to write your shows and your storylines about this topic. I just want to say thanks, first of all, to the wonderful staff. Marty mentioned them. They really put this whole thing together, and I showed up and they were all on their phones, and I said, what the heck are you doing? And they said, we're done. We're just waiting for the people to show up. So they're just a well-oiled machine, and I'm greatly appreciative of their hard work. Also, thanks to our funding partner, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, from whom you will hear shortly. The Writers Guild, the Producers Guild, SAG-AFTRA Foundation, and all the groups that we work with to bring this information and these extremely interesting experts and storytellers before you. For those of you who are new to Hollywood Health and Society and who we are, as Marty said, we're a free resource to TV and screenwriters on anything to do with health, safety, and security. And you can think about that as broadly as possible. From HIV to aging and caregiving, from nuclear weapons to maternal health. We can help you with all of those topics and more. Call us. Send us an email. We have operators standing by to take your calls and your emails. And as Marty said, it's all for free. So we are here as a free service to the entertainment industry to help ensure that you get your storylines as accurate as possible and that you are afforded an opportunity to speak with experts and real people who may have lived experience that would be of interest to you for your stories. So, and did I say it's free? Yes. Also, just letting everybody know that tonight's event we're streaming live on YouTube. You can find it on the Hollywood Health and Society Facebook page or our Twitter feed. So text your friends who aren't here and tell them they can tune in that way if they'd like. And then a video of this event will be on our website at a later date. So again, people can watch. So, okay. How many of you in this room know someone close to you, family or very close friend, who has been or is in jail or prison? Wow. Okay. Well, you proved the next point. Studies show that in the US, 1 out of every 7 people, not 7 adults, 1 out of every 7 people have an immediate family member who has spent a full year or longer in prison. 1 out of every 34 people have an immediate family member who has spent 10 years or longer in prison. And 1 in 4 Americans has had a sibling that's been incarcerated. So this is giving me cold chills, and it's not just the air conditioning. So this is not a topic that's for somebody else, or for some group. This is really something that affects all of us. 1 in 4 Americans has a sibling that's been in prison. So what is that like, not only for the folks in prison, but what is it like for the folks at home, the family members who are at home? And for those who are incarcerated, what is it like for them once they get out of prison? Is it all just done and they go back to normal? So with that, I want to introduce a short video that we made with our friends at Life Noggin. If any of you are aware of Life Noggin, it's an animated channel on YouTube. They do short little animations on a variety of topics, and we've done a number of videos with them. But this one we made with them that's going to help set up the discussion for tonight. So let's take a look. I'm going to introduce our panel now. I'm going to introduce our moderator, and he's going to introduce our panel, I should say. So it's my pleasure to introduce screenwriter and co-host of the podcast Scriptnotes, John August.
Hello and good evening. It is so nice to be here with you all in this nice little intimate room. Tonight we are going to be talking about the criminal justice system. We're going to be talking about the myths and realities of what the criminal justice system entails. And we're really going to be talking about biases. And so I want to start by talking about my own biases. I'm coming at this as a screenwriter. And so I'm looking at some of these issues from the perspective of what a writer, a filmmaker, someone in the media might want to take, want to learn about when it comes to criminal justice. And so how we tell the stories accurately, how we tell them better, how we avoid some of the tropes, and how we just do a better job writing about the criminal justice system. But I'm also coming at this as a citizen and as a person who votes and as a person who picks people who make policies that really impact how we think about criminal justice. So I really have 2 hats on my head, on my very bald head, as I look at these issues. And so I'm so lucky to have an amazing panel here. And I'm going to ask maybe some really naive questions, but I think questions that so often are not asked as we think about what criminal justice entails. So I'm going to start. I'm just going to get into it. I want to start with you, Aly. So Aly Tamboura is a manager in the Criminal Justice Reform Program at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, where he brings firsthand experience after spending a decade of his life incarcerated. Tamboura partners with formerly incarcerated leaders who are accelerating reforms, giving those who are closest to the problems a voice in reimagining a better justice system. Welcome, Aly.
Thank you.
So a couple months ago, I did a panel here for Hollywood Health and Society where we were talking about addiction and mental health. And one of the things I really wanted to start with is that there are a whole bunch of terms we use related to addiction and mental health that are just inherently negative, that sort of start from a judgmental basis, like alcoholic or addict. And so when you start using those words, you are automatically sort of coming in at a deficit. And there's words like that in relation to criminal justice as well. So before we start talking about anything else, can you talk us through some of the words and some of the terms that we may be using that are really not helpful at all? And so can we start using some better words as we start this conversation? What are some words that you hear, terms that you hear, that maybe we could just take off the table from the start?
I was going to say all of them.
All of them, all right.
I mean, when you think of things like ex-convict, prisoner, felon, ex-felon, parolee, those are all pejorative words meant to marginalize people, right? I remember having this big argument when I first came home with my parole officer. You know, he's calling me a parolee and this and that. I said, I'm not. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, you are. Yeah. I'm like, I am not the worst mistake I've ever made in my life, and I will never, ever, ever accept anybody telling me that I'm the worst mistake I ever made in my life, right? And you know, I challenge the audience out here. Imagine the worst thing you've ever done in your life. And imagine if someone called you that for the rest of your life, in employment, in housing, in access to healthcare, everything. You walk in the door and that's what they called you. And that's what it feels like when I hear this language.
So tell me why, so both, you started to explain like sort of why it's a negative, but also what are words we can use that are neutral, at least neutral, that actually acknowledge that you are a person and not the worst thing you've ever done.
Right, so instead of calling people prisoners or inmates, call them incarcerated people. Okay. I think if you keep the word people in
people or individuals,
acknowledging
that they're a human being.
In this context, right, it not only helps the individual who may have transgressed on one of our social norms, but it also helps society as a whole to be able to accept those people back in our society.
So you spent a decade of your life in prison.
12 years, 4 months, 21 days.
All right. And so can you talk us through just the reality of going from your normal life into a life as a person who is incarcerated? Talk to me about like the degree to which you lose your individuality. Are there aspects of that process? Because I have seen this in movies before. I've seen a person enter prison. What aspects of that are accurate that I've seen in movies and TV shows? What aspects of that are not accurate in your experience?
I mean, almost every aspect is not accurate. And I have to tell you, when I never thought for a minute in my life that I'd end up incarcerated, but I had, all of my knowledge was from media on what prison, jail, the court system was like. And I'm gonna say it starts in court. Like the idea that you have any control is, you hire an attorney or one's appointed for you. They take your name, they give you a case number, you become a case number, and you become a spectator, right? Very rarely, and most of the times, most people don't get up and testify in their defense. So you're just a spectator in this process. And then once you get to prison, then you really start getting stripped of your identity. You get a prison number, and that becomes who you are for the time of your incarceration. They take your clothing from you and mark you as a prisoner. You no longer can do the normal things that you did in life, like cook for yourself or wash your clothes or decide when you want to take a shower. So you really start losing, you lose your individuality, but you also lose your purpose, right? You know, most people in here have a purpose: get up, go to work, take care of your kids, take care of your family, go to school, whatever it is. In prison, your purpose soon, actually not like the day you arrive, becomes survival, right? How am I gonna make it through this? How am I gonna make it back to my family? And then you add on top of that this just crushing oppression, right? And isolation. You're just ripped completely away from your social network and very, very small channels of communication. And I just really, that's why I love my job, because we're content on changing this system.
So we can all be talking about the same terms. Can you explain the difference between jail and prison, or sort of what kinds of incarceration are out there?
Sure. So jail in most jurisdictions means that you are a ward of the county. It's usually lower level offenses, so misdemeanors and some felonies that they call wobblers. Usually couldn't spend more than a year in jail. In some jurisdictions that's changed now, though. And then if you have a sentence that's more than a year, then you become a state prisoner and you're a ward of the state. If you're in jail, you get probation after jail. If you go to prison, you get parole.
Okay, thank you. Next, I want to talk to Lovisa Stannow. She's the executive director of Just Detention International. She's also a trained rape crisis counselor, has written extensively about prisoner rape, including a series of high-profile articles in the New York Review of Books. Previously, Lovisa served as the executive director of the Pacific Institute for Women's Health and the West Coast director of Doctors Without Borders. Welcome, Lovisa.
Thank you.
So your organization works with jails and prisons in the US, but also internationally. So I would love to get some perspective on what do you see internationally that's the same or different than U.S. prisons? And sort of, can you broaden us out to a global perspective here?
Absolutely, thank you. So you're right. A lot of my work is in the United States, but I also am spending quite a bit of time inside South African prisons and also doing work in places like Mexico and the Philippines, but also Canada and Europe. And there are prisons in the world that are, logistically speaking, a lot worse than US prisons, in the sense that I have been inside facilities where half of the people don't have beds, where they sleep on the floor. I have been inside facilities where the government agency that incarcerates people doesn't provide food. So you rely completely on your family on the outside. There are also prisons in, for example, Canada or parts of Northern Europe that are relatively healthy institutions, in the sense that there's much more of a focus on helping people heal from whatever trauma brought them to the prison in the first place, and that are really committed to making sure people never come back. And the US ends up sort of somewhere in the middle there, but what's important is that we should not think that we're doing well here. And I think a lot of Americans believe that, relatively speaking, our prisons are okay. And that's just not the case. We incarcerate more people than anybody else in the world, both in terms of relative numbers and in relation, relatively speaking. And we keep people in prison for such a long time. People spend decades inside. They lose touch with their families. They are dehumanized at every turn, like we just heard. And in addition, US prisons are suffering from an epidemic of rape and sexual abuse. So every single year, in US detention, 200,000 people are sexually abused. So that's not the number of incidents. Most of these people are assaulted more than once. And that's not good enough. So I think there are reasons for us to be ashamed and alarmed about our prisons.
Now, we see portrayals in media of prison violence and sexual violence. Is it realistic? Is it realistic, and is it reinforcing that we see these portrayals? Like, to what degree are the expectations being set by the media we're seeing? So, what are you seeing in terms of sexual violence in prisons?
The narratives that we see in most movies and television shows that touch on sexual abuse in prison are really misguided and dangerous, and frankly inaccurate, both in the way prisoners themselves, incarcerated people, are described and portrayed, but also the way the institutions themselves are shown. So prisoners tend to be portrayed as somehow one-dimensional, casually cruel, less than human beings. And that's so far from the truth. And the actual institutions are often portrayed as these inherently violent places where there's no way we can keep people safe, and that's also not true. And these false narratives have real life consequences, because I think it means that we start to believe that prisoners are disposable, that it's okay to ignore people who are incarcerated, that it's okay to hate people who are incarcerated.
Zach, I'm going to ask you the next question, because you actually are making a show that is about an incarcerated person. Zach Calig is a writer-producer for the new ABC legal drama For Life, loosely based on the true story of Isaac Wright Jr. It tells the story of a man who was wrongfully imprisoned but while incarcerated became a licensed attorney and helped overturn the wrongful convictions of 20 of his fellow inmates. Zach, welcome.
Thank you.
Zach, now, I was reading up about the show, and I was struck by this quote from Isaac Wright Jr., who sort of inspired the show. I think one of the things that happens in the criminal justice system is that the prosecutor is able to control the narrative from the very, very beginning. The moment an arrest is made, they put out a press release to the media, and the media follows that narrative. They do control they control the destiny of the person they're going to be prosecuting. So you, as writing on the show, you got to sort of set your own narrative for what this story was going to be about and what it was going to be like. What were your challenges, and what did you see as the opportunities for setting the narrative for this person's life?
Well, one of the opportunities that we were able to exploit was giving every single person that was incarcerated a full backstory. We were able to talk about their relationships, their loves, their children, their hopes and dreams, and really humanize every single person, whether they were, I don't want to say the word villain, but whether they were an antagonist to our main character. Actually, both in prison and even the prosecutors, we tried not to have full heroes or antagonists. But we don't have any control over how a prosecutor will present a case, and probably will continue to be the same on their end. But we can, on our end, start to peel back the curtain and understand that it's not black and white, that at least in Aaron's case, there was an eyewitness lineup that he will prove to be tainted. And so one of the reasons he was able to do this, like, for example, you're called into an eyewitness lineup, and there's me and 4 other people. You don't recognize anyone. 2 weeks later, they say, John, we want you to come back in, and you see me and 4 new people, and now suddenly I look familiar. And in that case, Aaron, our protagonist, who is based on Isaac's life, is able to attack that and kind of set a precedent for his own case and free him. Also able to look at other issues in terms of like paid criminal informants, and in one case of someone who is giving information to a DA in order to get a get out of jail free card for himself. So with humanizing everyone who's incarcerated in our show, whether they deserve to be in their prison or not, and peeling back the curtain on the prosecutor, we're trying to paint a picture that there's more than what meets the eye.
Well, it sounds like we've all seen police lineups in TV shows. I mean, as long as I can remember, I've seen that scene, but I've never seen it from that perspective. So you're actually just taking a look at the same moments we would have seen in other shows, but from a different perspective, from really looking at sort of what's going on behind the scenes, that there was a second one, and so therefore that's why that character is familiar again. So you're questioning sort of how it actually really works. And was that research, or how did you get to that?
Research, well, I would say in dramatizing how loaded some of these portrayals can be. But yeah, that was research. We had an incredible staff. We had a writer who was a former CO. We had 2 attorneys, one of whom was a public defender, and opened up 3 nonprofits in criminal justice. We had a lot of writers, myself included, who had friends and family incarcerated. So everyone was able to bring these perspectives to the table to really put a vivid portrayal on a side of prison that we hadn't seen. I am personally guilty of watching Oz when I was a teenager and enjoying it at the time, but I also understand that that's problematic because it's one side of prison, but it really, I would say by and large, dehumanizes most of the people who are on the show.
No one comes off well in Oz. There are no heroes in Oz. Let's get to Dan Berman. So Dan Berman is an award-winning producer and director. He spent 6 years producing and directing the acclaimed documentary Me Facing Life, Cyntoia's Story, which follows 16-year-old Cyntoia Brown, who received a life sentence for murder in Tennessee. He's currently producing the second installment of Cyntoia's Story, exploring juvenile justice issues and her fight for freedom, slated for release this spring on Netflix. And we actually have a clip of this. So let's take a look at the clip of this Cyntoia Brown movie. So Dan, well, Zach was talking about taking a real-life person's story as a jumping-off place. You were talking about a real person who you met early on in this process. Can you catch us up to speed on like how you first got to know Cyntoia Brown, how you first got involved with this story, and what the change has been over the course of these years you've seen? Like how both she's changed, but really it feels like some of our assumptions about criminal justice have changed over the course of the time you've been making this documentary.
So in about 2004, I decided to take on the task of understanding how juveniles can become violent. And so it was my job as a documentarian to figure out how to tell that story. We don't get to write out the narrative. We actually have to go find it and bring it in. So I did a lot of research and found myself in Davidson County, the seat where Nashville is located, gaining access to the juvenile justice system, to the public defender's office. And over the course of a year, between 2003 and 2004, somewhere in there, Cyntoia Brown was arrested, and I got a call from the public defender's office saying, I think we have a story for you. That's after gaining a lot of access and trust. And I found myself on a plane within 3 hours with a little camera in my hand. The next morning, I was in Nashville at 6:30 in the morning, and by 7:30 I was staring in the face of a young girl, 16 years old, who looked like anybody's little girl, only knowing that she had done something pretty horrible. And so what I started doing was recording interviews with Cyntoia Brown. And we had an agreement back in 2004 that nobody on earth is going to allow me to do the story I wanted to do over time, but so that I was just going to have to follow the story on my own. And I decided to do that. And as long as she agreed not to lie to me or send me down, manipulate my storytelling process, that I would stay with the story as long as I needed to do that. And that has been 16 years.
So over those 16 years, in this little trailer we just saw, we talk about how she was initially described as being a prostitute. Now she's described as a victim of sexual abuse. That does feel like a change that's happened over the course of this time.
That's an insightful, you're going down an insightful path, because first of all, there are a lot of assumptions that go on in this system. And I started out I'm a filmmaker, I'm a documentary producer. So what I know about justice systems, you could put on the head of a pin and still have room for an entire bowling alley. But what I went in were my own assumptions. I started the story, to be quite frank with you, a very close personal friend of mine lost his mother because her granddaughter murdered her for drug money. And so I thought, well, that's messed up, so what do we do about that? So my assumptions, when I got the call, I said, tell me about Cyntoia, 16-year-old girl in the middle of prostitution, on drugs, got picked up by a 43-year-old man who picked her up for sex. Things went from bad to worse, and she murdered him. And so I thought to myself, and as I was flying to Nashville, I thought, Berman, what the hell are you doing? I mean, this is stuff we read in the newspaper every day. Why are you going down this path? And all of a sudden, I found myself asking, what the hell kind of question is that? She's a 16-year-old girl. So at that time, Cyntoia Brown was eviscerated by public media, by media. She was painted as someone who committed murder, a really bad thing to a upstanding citizen of the community and whatever. So my initial assessment centered on the crime and centered on a whole lot of factors that are our prejudices. But what I found over time is it ain't that simple. What took me 7 years to put out the first film was to really peel back the layers of humanity in a human story, because Cyntoia Brown is a human. And the world that she grew up in had a lot to do with shape her. Yes, she made a really bad decision on August 6th, 2004, really bad decision. But if we are busy not couching what people do with at least trying to shoot for some level of understanding, some level of perspective, then we're missing it. And the reason I think our film has been so successful, and now we've got this new film that's coming out. It's a redo. It's not an update. It's a redo. Is because I think we bothered to take a hard look at the humanity.
So in the Cyntoia Brown story, it's a murder that gets her caught up into the system, but that's not the reason why most people end up in the criminal justice system. Can we talk about the start of the process, like what it is that gets people involved in the criminal justice system and gets them into a situation where they may be incarcerated? Like, what are the common reasons for which a person is arrested, and how do arrests then lead to sort of the incarceration that we're seeing? Ali, what are you seeing as, what are the common factors that are getting people into our jails and our prisons?
I don't think that there's any, we can just say these are the 5 factors, because every person is different. In my case, lack of emotional intelligence, lack of impulse control, being raised in a hyper-masculine environment. But there are, I think a big chunk we can codify, and that's lack of opportunity. Like when people are thriving in the world, they're not going to go out and commit a crime, And so I think if we have opportunity for that segment of society. And then we would be able to deal with the people who really need the help.
And what are the specific things that people tend to be arrested for? Because we know about, like, you know, there's the issue of like nonviolent drug offenses that are getting people into the system. But what are the things that you see in your time in jail and in prison that you saw as being reasons why people are caught up in this net? What are the specific incidents that tend to get people?
A vast majority of the people are for drug sales or violence surrounding drug sales. Or drug use. And then there's a segment of people who have mental health issues. And as a society, we don't know what to do with those people anymore. So we send them to prison and jail. And then you have the people, like the category that I put myself in, who, you know, was in a bad situation, emotionally charged situation, and made a poor choice in that situation. And I want to challenge you a little bit. I don't think Cyntoia murdered her victim. I think she killed him, definitely. But the definition of murder, that premeditation, right? This little girl was being trafficked and made a poor decision, but I don't think, you know, I'm speculating, but I just don't believe in my heart that she got up that morning and said, oh, I'm going to go kill someone in a hotel, right? And to me, that's the definition of murder.
That's correct. She didn't get up that morning to decide to go murder somebody, to kill somebody. I use the word murder for a very dramatic reason.
Right.
And the reason I use the word murder is because that is a label that is put on someone who does kill somebody. She was convicted of murder. Yeah. She went to prison. She became incarcerated for having convicted first-degree murder. So I use the word for a little bit of a dramatic effect. It's not perhaps the best word, because I think we showed that there's a much deeper story, and as in fact, Cyntoia Brown is a free person today, because somebody stopped and bothered to look at a young woman in 360 degrees. But I want to just add one more thing to your question. In the year that Cyntoia was arrested, 2.2 million children were arrested for violent crime that year. That year. A third of them were girls. 98% of the girls who were arrested that year, according to the Department of Justice, the data that I found, were also victims of sexual and physical abuse. So I think there are ways to categorize what are the crimes of the day, but I think what we're really looking at are the situations of the day. And I think what we miss as writers, as filmmakers, I'm a documentarian, so I have to go for facts anyway, but is being able to find perspective, because it's not as sexy to find perspective.
Yeah. So you're saying that we might notice the arrest, but the actual incidents that were leading up to that arrest happened way before that, and we're outside
big.
of the control of
it's way the hell big.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that there were no lawyers who were ready to put in 6 years of their time to go find the birth mother, the adoptive mother, the maternal grandmother, and to understand their stories that led to 3 generations of violence that resulted in Cyntoia Brown. I don't think the system knows how to do that.
Well, let's talk about the process from the moment that a person is arrested, and sort of portrayals we see in the media. We tend to see it from the prosecutor's point of view. We tend to see like, well, we're trying to figure out who committed this crime. We've found a person. This is the person who committed the crime. We were going to convict this person, and then credits roll, and the thing is over. What are we missing from the other side of the story? What side are we not seeing? And Zach, maybe you could speak to that just a little bit. Like, what side are we not seeing of what it's like to be on the receiving end of criminal justice systems?
Well, for the people that matter, the jury, they're not seeing the human element. They're not seeing the circumstances in which some of these crimes were committed. And they're not seeing what goes on in the police department. They're basically only seeing what the prosecutor wants them, especially if someone can't afford a good attorney. And the quality of attorney that one has kind of determines the narrative that's going to be put out there. And when you said, we don't see other narratives, it just made me think of Harvey Weinstein. Well, we see his narrative because he can afford the best attorney money can buy, and most people cannot.
Aly, when you see people who are caught up at the start of the criminal justice system, when you see people who are arrested, do you have any sense of like what the percentage of people who are arrested or go to trial are going to be convicted? I'm guessing it's quite high.
Yeah. So in America, and this is just a shocking statistic, if a prosecutor charges you with a felony, you have a 97% chance of being found guilty, whether you're innocent of the crime or not. And I want to highlight something about the prosecutor narrative, right? Prosecutors have a very, very, very difficult job. And I argue that they're also system impacted. They see the worst of humanity every day. They work in an antiquated system with very, very little to no technology. They read a police report and literally in a matter of minutes, most times less than an hour, make a charging decision that is going to affect the offender, affect the victim, affect the community, affect taxpayers. And I'm proud to say one of the things that we are doing at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is working with prosecutors, helping them use data and technology and get better at making more informed decisions that have better outcomes for everybody.
So let me back up to say, so when a person is arrested, you would like the prosecutor to say, not only how good of a case can I make, but really first ask, is this person the actual person who committed the crime? Is this person the guilty person? And what is actually the appropriate response for what's happened there? Are those the two things, or what else am I missing?
Well, I think, it's more nuanced than that, but I think one of the things is we have this adversarial system, right? What a police officer writes in a police report is held as gospel. And once a person goes in, you really, really have very, very little control. Like Zach said, unless you can hire an expensive attorney, you're literally a spectator. And it's even worse if you can't afford bail, because you can't even assist your attorney in your defense because you're in jail.
Yeah. Talk to us about bail, because that's a system that I don't really understand. And how does bail come about? What is the decision about who gets bail, who does not get bail, and what is a person expected to be able to put up for bail? Because I know of bail bondsmen and all sorts of stuff. I'm sure it's different state by state, but what are some useful things that writers and filmmakers can understand about how bail works if a person is arrested?
So supposedly, you're innocent until proven guilty, and bail is a way to get people to show up to court. So if you have some skin in the game, right? If you're accused of a crime and they set bail, there's a bail schedule for offenses in every jurisdiction and every geography. They say, okay, you stole a car, your bail is $50,000. Usually people don't have $50,000. So what they do is they pay a bail bondsman 10%, right? The bail bondsman...
So they would have to pay $5,000, and
right.
The bail bondsman would basically do an insurance policy on...
Exactly. And that's funny, because the insurance industry underwrites most of the bail bondsmen, and they take that 5% as a fee. Yeah. Or 10%. It really depends on the bail bondsman, but anywhere from 5 to 10%.
So it's basically a tax on that person for having been
right. And so what happens is if you're wealthy, you can post the whole bail, and after you get out of trial, you get your money back, or you can leverage your real estate. But if you're poor, you're stuck in jail. And you're stuck in jail, this is pre-trial. You're not proven guilty, so you're already incarcerated. And the issue with that is people that are poor, you lose your job, you lose your house, you just it's just this cascade that goes downhill. And then it also forces you into, a lot of times prosecutors, if you're sitting in jail 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days, they'll come and say, oh, well, take a plea deal, I'll let you out today. Yeah. And people plead out sometimes for things they didn't do.
Great. Now, Lovisa, if a person is sitting in jail during this time, they're not able to make bail, what are the range of things they could see in jail? Because it feels like, I'm guessing that jail is not a place that anyone ever wants to be. But what, in your experience dealing with jails, I know, you were consulting with the Aspen jail, but also there's, I'm sure worse jails than the Aspen jail. What does one encounter in jails?
Well, one of the biggest jails in the world is just minutes away from here, which is the the Men's Central Jail, downtown Los Angeles. And jails tend to be pretty terrible places, partly because people are supposed to be there for only short periods of time, either awaiting trial or as Ali already said, spending maybe up to a year if they get a short sentence. And that means that there's even less programming, there's even less attention being paid to why people ended up there in the first place. There are so few services in a jail to actually help all these women who arrive because they have endured horrible trauma previously in life, or men who have endured trauma. So jails tend to be really chaotic places and violent places, both in terms of physical violence in general, but also sexual abuse.
So obviously, we're focused on the media narratives here, but let's just, at each step of the process here, what are some things that could be done to fix this part of the early process? So from arrest to trial, what things would you here on the stage like to see done? So I hear things about cash bail reform or the end of cash bail. Can someone explain what that actually really means? Because I don't want to explain it wrong.
One of the writers on our show created a nonprofit, one of the attorneys, called the Bail Project. And the idea behind bail was that if someone who's going through a trial has skin in the game, then they will post a bond and be able to return to collect that money. And what this organization did is it paid bail for people who could not afford it, predominantly people in lower income communities. And they found that 96% of their clients came back. And it kind of blew away the notion that people need skin in the game to even consider coming back to their trial. And now they're in 20 cities across America, and that's one of the things that they're pushing for and collecting the data to kind of dispel this myth that we have.
Dan, Cyntoia is a teenager, so what did you see in terms of a teenager entering the jail system? Like, what do we do with juveniles who are caught up in that system? What are the right choices? Putting you on the spot to fix juvenile incarceration.
I think the hard work of understanding what a juvenile's process should be centers on a lot of factors. One is, where did they come from? What situations are they in? But the system is not designed, it's not intended to understand the circumstances. It's not intended at all. And it's easy to, look, I think in television and film, it's easy to vilify everybody. It's easy to vilify the prosecutor. It's easy to vilify the cops. It's easy to vilify, everybody associated with the system, but everybody comes at this with pieces of information, pieces of destiny, what they're supposed to do. And I think that I'll never forget that the sheriff of Davidson County asked to take a look at the fine cut of our first documentary before we released it. And he said, "Oh my God, we missed this one." And I said, I'm not sure you could have seen it. I mean, these are people who are overworked, overwhelmed by a lot of people coming into their system. And Cyntoia Brown was just one of them, one of many that day. How do you stop and go take a look at what their environment was like?
But I would challenge that, like, as storytellers, we have the opportunity to make a character out of one of those prosecutors and let that person realize that there's actually more to the story, and actually let that person be a heroic person actually to step beyond their job to actually realize what's going on there and how to sort of best serve that person.
I got to tell you, these are great characters. I mean, Jeff Burks, who was the prosecutor in Cyntoia's case, was a hardworking guy, a thinking guy. He's also an animated guy, and he's a guy who's got a great theatrical presence. For anybody who's writing a story, if you were to watch Jeff Burks in action, you'd go, "Oh my God, I want to write about that guy." And if you look at each of the people involved, the police officer, the detectives involved, they all have that presence. The hard work for us as the filmmakers, as the writers, as for me, the documentary guy, is to take a much harder look, a much closer look at what makes those characters tick. That's the fun stuff, because if you take it from the surface, we'll see a prosecutor who's doing his job. But if we dig a little deeper, we'll find something more.
All right, let's talk about this. The person we're talking about is now incarcerated. This person is going into a prison situation. Can we talk about the depictions of entering prison versus what reality is? Because I feel like I've seen the scene where the character goes to prison a zillion times, and I don't know how much of any of that is accurate. Ali, can you talk us through some of the things you see in media about entering prison and what myths you'd like to see dispelled?
You know, you always see the guy walking with, or gal walking with, it's
the folded clothes.
The folded clothes. You got your sheet, your towel, and your socks and underwear, and then there's a bunch of people catcalling, and you know, and I'm just like, oh no, oh God, this is just not how it works. In reality, how it works is, I mean, it's a very, very spirit-breaking process. You're taking from the county jail to what they call a reception center.
Which is not the prison itself, or sort of out.
So they are prisons. I think California, we have like 4 reception centers. So depending on what geography you
Sounds so nice.
Well, no, they send you there and you're put directly in isolation. So there is no contact with family members. I spent 101 days in isolation in a prison called Delano. I had no paper, no pen, no pencil, no phone calls.
And is the stated purpose behind this just for safety and protection?
No, it's an assessment time. So you get medically screened. You get screened for education, and then you go in and you go to an actual hearing, and they decide your custody level, and then you get shipped to one of California's 36 prisons, the main prisons, and then in California, you have death row, which is the highest custody level, and then it goes level 4 down to level 1. And usually you can earn your way down. So the idea is by the time you're getting ready to go home, you're in a minimum security facility. Some people, depending on their score, never reach like a Corcoran level 4 or like Pelican Bay. And there's a total different type of violence that happens there. It's very extreme, but it's not the whistling cat calls that you see that's depicted in movies and on cinema.
Lisa, this last week, a big Hollywood person, Harvey Weinstein, got sentenced to prison. We were talking beforehand that you were expecting there to be a whole bunch of like Harvey Weinstein rape jokes, and they did not come. Is that progress? Is that good news that wasn't the first thing that Twitter jokesters went to?
Yeah, I hope it's progress. I hope we won't find that there is a bunch of jokes happening tomorrow about Harvey Weinstein. But one of the things that really filled me with dread was once the conviction hit the news, we learned that his lawyer had said he took it like a man. And I just thought, oh no, now we're going to get all the jokes, all the don't drop the soap jokes. But to my great surprise, it didn't really happen. There were some sort of minor tweets that were just tasteless, but there was also some strong pushback from higher profile media folks. And I'd like to hope that means we've turned some kind of corner, because I think that the sort of flippant treatment of rape in detention is really one of the, it's a really dangerous trope, and it's one of the biggest problems with Hollywood's approach to criminal justice.
You talk about detention, and detention, in the U.S., I think we think about criminal justice as keeping those people outside of society, and other countries may think of it more about rehabilitation and pushing people, getting people the skills they need so they can function back in society. Can you talk us through some of the different approaches that other countries, or sort of more positive approaches other countries might take to this person who was convicted of a crime and is now incarcerated? Like, what are some things that we might see that are different in other countries?
Well, in healthier prisons, basically, those who are incarcerated are allowed to live somewhat normal lives. They get to still have some control over their lives. That whether it's just that they're allowed to wash their own clothes or cook their own food, which doesn't necessarily seem like a privilege to those of us on the outside, but that's hugely important to actually, especially for people who arrive with profound trauma in their past, who may never have lived a mainstream life. They have a chance to learn basic skills that are essential upon release. And so those are really important basic programs that we are typically lacking in the US.
Zach, in your show, your central character gets his law degree while in...
In our show, he gets his law degree while in custody.
Okay.
It made it simple for the audience to understand that he's an attorney. In reality, he got his law degree after, but he did everything that we're portraying as a paralegal in prison.
So it sounded like, I would say as a screenwriter that he was able to build a sense of purpose and autonomy for himself in doing the work for other people who are incarcerated, and the education that he's getting, the education he's able to get is what allows him to feel like, not just a number, but actually a person with value. Was that a goal of the show?
It's interesting you say that because he's actually not this altruistic do-gooder at the top. He's really taking cases at the beginning of the season specifically to knock down the pillars of his own case and get himself a new trial. Obviously, because it's Hollywood and it's television, we may see this character evolve and start to do something for someone else without personal benefit. But we also go in, he starts out an attorney in the pilot, but we do have a flashback episode so we can understand how he got to where he is, and we see him arriving in prison. We skip through a lot of the areas where he's not interacting with other people, but we see him kind of acclimate to this culture and decide to find purpose in the law. And at first, yes, it's a selfish-driven purpose, but it does give him purpose, and ultimately he'll find value in helping other people.
Dan, we haven't seen your movie yet, but I want to know to what degree...
April 30th.
April 30th. To what degree is Cyntoia able to grow into being a woman over the course of her time in prison? Like, is she able to
I have to tell you,
skills
watching Cyntoia over the 15 years that I watched her, I was amazed. Here is a young woman who walked in with a whole lot of issues going on for her. She's staring at a life in prison that she might not walk out of, and yet she bothers to take advantage of everything that the prison has to offer in this case. And she got an education, one course at a time. She graduated while in prison with a bachelor, with an associate degree. Then she worked her way toward a bachelor's degree. She worked on a whole mechanism for helping kids, keep them from going down the same path that she went, and help them out of trouble when they see themselves getting into trouble before they get into trouble. So, I'm watching her grow up through this entire time. So the transition for her walking out of incarceration and on, back into a life means a continuation of a process that she's been doing. It's not an on-off switch. She's not all of a sudden a new person. She's a developing person. And even this, you stop thinking about it too. And I think something that we had to wrap our heads around is that, even the Supreme Court recognizes that kids who are incarcerated are starting out with squirrely brain syndrome, and at some point they grow up and mature and they become something different. They evolve.
Now, part of the decision...
Although the Supreme Court didn't say squirrely brain syndrome.
They didn't say squirrely brains. Part of the ideally the end of an incarceration comes at parole, or there's some sort of hearing, there's an assessment. I've seen that scene in movies, and I don't know if anything I've seen in movies is accurate. Aly, can you talk us through what the end of incarceration looks like, and what a parole hearing, or how that actually happens in real life?
It really depends on your sentence. So there's two different types of sentences in California, and actually across more than two, because you can get the death penalty. But the basic two are determinate and indeterminate sentences. So, for instance, if you're sentenced in California to 25 years to life, after the 25 years, you go in front of a parole board, and they assess your behavior in prison, your growth, your ability to articulate how you were able to commit a crime, and they make a decision, and you're either released or you go back to prison, and they give you some recommendations, and you come back later. And then there's determinate sentences. Determinate sentences, you're just sentenced to 5 years. Yeah. And when you're done, you get out and you're on parole for usually 3 years.
And so in a determinate sentence, could you be released earlier on good behavior, or could there be other circumstances which could get you out in less time than that?
So in California, there's 3 tiers of credits that you can earn. So most everybody can get out a little bit early. If you're a violent offender, you're going to do 85% of your law under the Truth in Sentencing law. If you're a drug offender, you do about 50% of your time. If you're a very, very low-level offender, you can actually get out in a third of your time. And those are the men and women that you see like that are out fighting fires in California. They earn a lot more credits.
How do we feel about that? I don't know how to feel about that. So that actually was a topic we brought up on Scriptnotes. It was about these people who are fighting fires on California's behalf. And you could see it as an inspiring story of these people who are getting a chance to sort of do stuff, but you can also see it as like they are kind of incarcerated labor that's very dangerous. So well, I don't know how to feel about that at all.
Slavery is still legal in prison. I mean, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery everywhere but in prison. I mean, I worked for 9 cents an hour when I was in prison. I think there's a way to do it right. I just think we're doing it wrong right now. I think I actually went to Norway and Finland, and one of the people in our delegation was in the assembly here in California, and I talked to him about these men and women are going out there risking their lives for, I think they get $1 a day. I think it's $5 a day if they're fighting a fire. And then to come home and have fines and fees, right? Yeah. What do you mean? I just risked my life, saved millions, maybe billions of dollars of property, and I still owe, $20,000 for my fines and fees. So I think that should be eliminated. I think that they should be compensated decently. And third, I think they should be eligible to work as firefighters post-incarceration.
Can I add something
please,
there?
Please.
Is that there are other prison jobs that are quite invisible to the outside world, and that I think most Americans are completely unaware that, for example, there are major sweatshops inside prisons. There are, when you buy your next T-shirt that says "Made in the USA," chances are it was actually made in a prison, and then it was sent out to some other place that just applied the logo. There are government agencies that uses prisoners to answer their phones. So next time you throw a fit because someone can't help you, you might be talking to a prisoner who has no power and who's making, I think now it's probably 11 cents an hour. And so this, it's just important to have this an awareness of that.
And what are ways? So, what are ways that people who are incarcerated at this moment could get some skills for work that? So I really want to transition to what is life like after prison, and so how do you find a person who's been incarcerated, who's then out in the world? What are the good outcomes? What are the success stories? What are paths that could sort of get somebody to not be caught back up in the system again?
There's 70 to 100 million people in the United States who have a criminal conviction. So there's a lot of success stories out there. We just don't highlight them. We always go to the parolee that did something wrong. But I think, and
in terms like ex-convict, it does not help.
Doesn't help,
exactly.
Right? It doesn't help. It's like, could you imagine if when I went and applied for my job and I said, "Hey, I'm an ex-convict. You want to hire me?" Right? It doesn't work. But getting back to your question, I believe that our electeds and our carceral system has a duty to make sure people leaving the system don't go back and re-victimize communities. And until...
So it's a duty both to the person who's leaving the system, so that they're actually ready to function, but also to society.
I mean, and I believe in personal responsibility and taking advantage of, like you were saying, Cyntoia, taking advantage of all the educational opportunities. But if you don't have those educational opportunities and you're locked up in a concrete and steel box for decades, and then they push you out with California, they give you $200 with no skills, very low education. What are you going to do, right? And so I think there's a lot of programs. I learned to write computer code And I can tell you, I wouldn't have the job here today. I don't write code anymore, but I learned how to write computer code. There was a program called The Last Mile. I get to fund them now, which is awesome, right? And it's just this sort of crazy tournament of events. They're in 6 states and 13 prisons. And so when I came home, I had these skills, these marketable skills. Like software engineers are in high demand. And I don't know if you've ever been on a floor of an engineering group, but people with red hair and tattoos on the face. They don't care. If you can write the code, if you can build it, they'll hire you. And so I think really starting to think about what and skills that pay a living wage, right? What the carceral, what public-private partnerships in the carceral setting can do to offer opportunities to our folks when they're coming home.
Dan, we're going to lose you in a few minutes because I know you have to catch a flight. But I want to talk about sort of Cyntoia Brown. I'm a little spoiler, post-prison. We'll watch your movie, so we'll see sort of what happened. But did she feel like she was ready for life outside of this? Because she'd spent half of her life.
Well, she spent 15 years incarcerated. And she, as I said, she did take advantage of programs and people who were in contact with her to help her just kind of readjust her thinking and her approach and how she was, who she was, and to rethink who she was. And I can't, I don't know how somebody, I don't know where that turn happens because I'm neither a psychologist nor have I lived with incarceration. But I can tell you what I observed. And what I observed was a young woman going through stages. Denial at first, where she, I'm going to walk out of here. When I first interviewed her, she was sure that within a few weeks this was all just going to be done and she was going to walk out of the jail and back into her life. She was sure of that. And then there was a point at which, oh my God, the likelihood is that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison, and that is my destiny. And there was a bit of a resignation. But then when she actually went from jail to the Tennessee Prison for Women, and she started working on things, by having at least a program, I'm not going to sit here and say that Tennessee Prison for Women is the most progressive prison in the world. It is not, for a whole lot of reasons. But they are also taking progressive steps to allow an education program that's big. So for her, whether she was going to walk out or not, she at least had some hope. There was something called hope in there. So there's even if there's a little flicker of that, she gets to develop as a person while she's going through the maturation process and through an education process, and it kind of works out so that when she walks out, she has written a book. She started writing that before she was out. She's giving talks. She's helping legislators. Tennessee is taking some very progressive steps, which is amazing to see. They're learning from it too.
Well, it sounds like what you're describing is we think about the criminal justice system as being like sort of extinguishing hope, and you're stressing that we have to make sure that we are igniting hope in people who are incarcerated, that they actually can, that society wants them back, and that there is going to be a place for them, and that they are meaningful and valuable individuals.
I suspect there's a place called balance where we might see situations treated differently so that hope becomes the goal as opposed to punishment as the goal. Yeah, look, people do bad things. There's no question about it. People are, I'm sure that for Johnny Allen, his family was certainly not very sympathetic to whatever Cyntoia Brown went through. She couldn't turn that around. It was impossible for her to turn that situation around. However, do we throw away a person? Do we throw away a human without at least considering alternatives? And I have a flight to catch.
Wonderful, and we're going to open up to questions. Dan, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Dan, thank you. Thank you so much. All right, we have time for some questions now. So we have people with microphones, and so raise your hand and we'll get somebody with a microphone to you so you can ask your question of the panel. And I can barely see, I see a hand over there on the edge.
Hi, my name's Angelica. I'm from the South, so I've been deep in the South and seen some of the horrendous conditions that have been in the prisons like Parchment in Mississippi. If you all haven't heard about what's happening there, you should look it up. So I have kind of two questions for Aly and Lovisa. I wanted to know, have you all explored any alternatives to justice, like restorative justice or prison abolition? What do those concepts look like for you and how they work in the real world? And for Zach, mass incarceration has a lot of racial and socioeconomic disparities. And how have you approached those in writing, producing, research on the show?
Angelica, you have totally a job as a moderator. Those are great questions. So I want to start with alternatives to sort of traditional criminal justice. Aly, do you want to start?
So in my personal capacity, absolutely right. I try to bring those voices into our foundation, but our foundation, like, we can only do so much. So right now we're really focused on two areas, and that's the funnel of people coming in to the criminal justice system. So really transforming the way we prosecute in this country. So we're putting people in prison for less time and having alternatives to prison, because prosecutors really right now only have one lever, and that's like incarceration with fines and fees. And then on the tail end is really expanding opportunities to formerly incarcerated people, really making sure they have the opportunities in their life to thrive post-incarceration.
Lovisa, do you have any thoughts on alternatives to prisons or things you've seen that we should be considering?
I think it's pretty clear that we are incarcerating people at a crazy level in this country, and that it's not a fair system at all. That one of the questions you asked early on, John, was what are some of the things that make people end up in prison? And of course, the answer to that is quite complicated, because it depends on what you look like and who you are. Because the kinds of things that, if we all committed the same crime in this room, some would be much more likely to be arrested than others and convicted and get very long sentences and be denied parole. And there's just incredible racism and classism in the system. So if we started addressing those really fundamental issues, then I think our incarceration rates would become a little bit more normal as they relate to the world, because we incarcerate, 6-7 times more people than Canada. Why?
And Zach, let's talk about the racial component of disparities in criminal justice. And sort of in the show, how do you address that? And how do you look at that?
You absolutely have to address it. Doing any sort of show in prison right now. The last I've read, that the statistics being that African Americans make up 13% of the U.S. population, but nearly a third of inmates in prison, and Latinos about under 15%, but almost a quarter of inmates in prison. And so we're very conscious of that. We don't shy away from it, but we don't try to lean in too hard to recreate that narrative, if you know what I mean. We also had a very diverse room of storytellers to make sure we did include everyone's perspectives, and that was very important to us. And in terms of looking at mass incarceration, I think one of the things that our show does very well is it looks at the collateral damage as well. And it's not a show just about Aaron behind bars in Belmore. It's a show about Aaron Wallace and his family, and what it did to his daughter, who was raised without a father at home, and what it did to his wife and their relationship, and what it does to the families of not just Aaron, but all these secondary characters in our show too. And that's, in my opinion, what the beauty of our show is, and the comment that makes on mass incarceration.
Yes, I see you.
Hi, I'm currently doing work in bail reform in California, working in partnership with the LA Superior Court and LA County Probation. And with the SB 10 and bail reform in California, you know that the process under SB 10 would require the use of risk assessment tools as an alternative to having cash as a way for a person to be released. And I just wanted to know what the thoughts are on the use of risk assessment tools in determining whether or not a person should be released.
And because I don't know, so SB 10 is a state law about.
It's a bail reform law that's trying to essentially eliminate cash bail. There are some places that have done it way better than California. There's a lot of issues with SB 10. And to answer your question, we're a tech-based philanthropy, so we build tools for nonprofits, and that's how I came into this work as a software engineer. There are some really, really tough things that we have to consider when we start using technology to determine the destiny of people's lives. And so, we don't take that lightly. I think there's no one answer for that. A lot of the risk assessment tools or the data that they put in them are already biased. So you can create something that has the bias that's in the data. So it's a tough thing that smarter people than me are working on.
Another question. On the edge there, then we'll go to the center there.
Hi. So another group that's often treated in dramatizations of anything to do with prison reform in a sort of caricature way are the guards. And I'm wondering if you could talk for a second about the psychology of and experience of and bureaucracy of the guards.
I get to talk about sort of like the stereotypes I see of guards, and then I would love to hear some reality checking on this. Is that I always see the burly, undereducated, hot-headed prison guard who is abusive and sort of a know-nothing. And I've rarely seen a positive portrayal of a guard in prison. What are some realities? I'm sure there's a whole range of sort of what these people are like, what people who do that job are like. What are things that we're missing? What are stories that we're not seeing about people who are guards in prisons?
I think the portrayal of guards, there are those type of people, but there's also some very, very empathetic. I'm reluctant to tell this story, but I had the flu before I came home, and I really thought I was going to die. You go through the stages where you think you're going to die, then you want to die, right? As an adult with the flu, and this prison guard bought medicine from Walgreens or something out there and risked his job and brought it in and gave it to me. And so, I think they're human beings just like anybody else. They get a bit jaded and get calloused from being in the job. But I have a great relationship with the California Department of Corrections, and I don't have Stockholm syndrome, right? I think if we're going to improve the system, we need to improve their lives also. And get some trauma-informed care for them also.
Lovisa, I'm guessing training is an important thing for prison guards.
Yeah, and I just want to agree with what you were saying, which is that there's a full spectrum of people in the corrections profession, and some are definitely drawn to prison jobs because they like hard power. And for example, just to when you talk about sexual abuse in detention, half of all sexual abuse in detention, you wouldn't know this through Hollywood, but is actually perpetrated by prison officials, and half is among incarcerated people. So there are definitely guards who are in the job for all the wrong reasons, but also many who come to the profession because they care. And they want to make things better. They don't always succeed because these are really toxic environments. And some people also get destroyed in these jobs. And it's something that we see very clearly that former corrections officials, upon retirement, they tend to retire early. They usually have very poor outcomes in retirement.
Zach, as you were looking at prison guards in your show, what were some of the expectations and how did you try to push against them?
Well, so it's interesting. We originally characterized one prison guard, and he was kind of like this tough, burly, if you watch the pilot, you can tell he's an emotionally abusive guard, and one of the things we're able to do in season is dive into this person's depression. And I won't give anything away, but we do look at his home life, and we do look at the trauma that he suffered from spending so long here. And this is a person who actually went into the profession because his father was in the profession, and that's very common as well. And I will say, funny enough, we had a wall in the writer's room of all our guards because we would just script like guard number 2, guard number 3. And then we started over the season to like ascribe character traits to these guards. And then we would find situations where certain guards could display moments of kindness and allow Aaron to hug his daughter while he showed up early to court and his daughter wanted to watch him, or allow Aaron to touch his father when his father came to visit him for his character and fitness hearing. And though, I mean, they're not supposed to do that, but sometimes we characterize them in really small moments that humanize them. And it would be nice to get into the guards more in future
So
seasons.
you're recognizing them as individuals and not just one monolithic force, that everybody who wears that uniform is
not
sa-
monolithic, yeah. And
Yeah.
we'll differentiate them and figure out who's going to do what and who has what characteristics.
Question was right over here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about humanizing them when they're in prison, but I'd like to know what your experiences are as far as humanizing them before they enter the prison system. And I know that that's very, very complex, what leads these people to prison, but there's so many traumas, so many experiences, like Cyntoia Brown was sexually assaulted. They never questioned her psychological state of mind, the fact that she herself was a victim before she committed the act that she committed. And I don't know if you guys have exposure to organizations that are working on that, but sort of what the preventative measures are, if any at all, within the community, within societies, to prevent them from even being convicted at all. That's my question. And I know it's a little complicated.
Yeah, no, Aly, you started talking about this, and we sort of moved on to sort of early in the process. But you were saying that like it does start, well before, any interaction with law enforcement. That there's something has happened here.
I think as a society we really have to start looking at like the history of racism and the use of the carceral system as a social control mechanism. But I really think, like I said in the beginning, that if we offer more opportunities to people, they're not going to end up in our prison jails. And then to answer your question, there are some organizations like Debug who is doing participatory defense. So your family and everybody gets involved in your defense. There's an organization called Root and Rebound who's growing into, I think they're in like 7 or 8 states now. So there are organizations that are trying to help people on the front end to really have a robust defense that brings in some of these things so the judges and the DAs can hear them. But one of the problems is that our criminal legal system is not built to allow that information to come in. A lot of the times they just say it's irrelevant. It doesn't have anything to do with what happened with the crime. Therefore, depending on the judge, they're not going to let that kind of data come in.
Can I add something? I think trauma is a bit of a blind spot in society generally, and especially inside prisons. That if you look at the pathways of women entering prison, it's not just juveniles, but adult women as well are the vast majority. Maybe about 90% of women in prison are sexually abused survivors from prior to their detention. So these are extreme numbers, and their trauma has tended to be ignored before they were detained, and then it continues to be ignored inside, because trauma doesn't count as a mental illness, or it's not something that there are services for in detention. So people are then sitting in detention for years or decades with this untreated trauma. And then they're released, and they may be getting some help to find a job or find somewhere to live, but if they still get no support to deal with their trauma, they won't succeed.
Oh, sorry, you already have one. Great. You.
Hi. One of the things that, thank you for your experience and everything that you've offered so far has been really, really enlightening. One of the things I feel like in this conversation that we miss is the economic incentive to incarcerate. And so there's the economic incentive to incarcerate, and that the incarceration caste system is literally designed to prioritize the incarceration of Black and brown folks. And so like the residual spillover of that, like, infects our systems. So like you talked about, kind of going to the question earlier about like, guards. I used to be a prison guard for almost 4 or 5 years. There's, with those who are incarcerated as well as those who are the jailers, most of those folks are coming from communities that are decimated by poverty. And so you have the incarcerated who, more often than not, especially with the majority of prison people who are incarcerated being locked up for drug crimes, which is has its own rich history on why that happens, are in there because they didn't have the resources to be able to survive and thrive. Then you have folks who are looking for employment in order to survive in their own, in their communities, and they're taking on jobs with little to no post high school education to go in and work in these systems. So one of the things I'm really curious about your thoughts on is like, how do we talk about the intersection of race and how it functions as with economic incentives to incarcerate black and brown folks in this country?
So there's this wonderful woman. Her name is Bianca Tuilik. She puts out this report every year about the prison industrial complex and who's profiteering off of it, and how that keeps driving incarceration. We have private prisons who lobby for tough on crime laws. We have guards unions who lobby for tough on crime laws, and so there's just a lot of work to be done in this area. I'm fortunate that I work with a lot of really, really smart people, and there's other foundations and lots of nonprofits that are chipping away on all of these little aspects. But it's going to take, it took us 400 years to get here. It's going to take us some time to get back. But really recognizing the racial part of it is part of it, and coming to Jesus, like, we built a system that is biased, and we need to deconstruct it.
A question: are you a writer?
Lee was a writer on our show, I just might say.
Oh, very nice.
I wrote one for so when you talk about the former CO,
Oh, well, that's fantastic. So I'm glad you're on that show, because I was going to say, like, well, it sounds like you should write about that, because I think, because here's what I'm hearing and what you're saying is you're talking about the intersection of the people who are on either side of those bars have similar stories, and that is fascinating, and the degree to which this whole system, that everyone is trapped up in the same, everyone's caught up in that same system. That is a really great, strong narrative, cinematic element. So I was just encouraging you to write on that. I don't think we have any time for more questions, but I did want one last little segment here, which is the thing I did for the addiction and mental health panel, which is called Please Stop, which is the things that people up here see on a repeated basis in film and television and media that is just wrong or not helpful when it comes to criminal justice. Luis, I know you had some recommendations for Please Stop. So what are some things you hope to never see again on screen?
I would hope to never see a "don't drop the soap" joke.
Yeah.
Again, ever. And also to never see one of these flippant taunts about in police shows where cops who are portrayed as the good guys are telling the bad guys that do what we want because otherwise you'll go to prison and get raped. But they say it differently.
Yes. Zach, we actually had a clip of your show, which we've not shown yet. Would you like to show the clip of your show?
I defer to you.
I feel like we've got a good sense of your show. We can show it at the end. We'll show it at the end as we're wrapping up. What would you like to don't stop?
Stop.
Please stop.
Creating as a writer's perspective, one-note characters where people are entirely good or entirely evil. And Lee was mentioning the prosecutors. We talked about the prosecutors before. We go to great lengths to characterize the people who put Aaron away, and they legitimately believe that he's guilty. They legitimately believe he's doing the right thing. They may have cut some corners. We'll come to learn through the season. One of them may know, one of them may not, and they'll have some infighting with each other. But both of these people are men who believe they were doing the right thing. And I think if one were to characterize him as a Klansman, it would not do justice to the system, and it would not be accurate to the reason why he gets a report on his desk and says, you know what, this is a good case, I'm going to put this person away.
If that person were thoroughly evil and a villain, then we wouldn't see any of ourselves in him, and we wouldn't recognize our own complicity in those types of decisions.
And we wouldn't know how we can improve the system and do it differently.
Ali, please stop. What things do you want to, don't want to see out there?
I was in LAX when I was coming here, and I saw this kid throw himself on the floor and just do this tantrum.
Yeah.
And his mother gave him what he wanted. And I thought, damn, that's a learning experience for me. So for me, even up on the stage, I heard like Zach saying inmate. And it kills me to hear people categorized by these words that we use. And so if you as writers can start using people, like instead of calling someone a felon, you could say a person convicted of a felony, right? Because if we keep the word person in there, right? Employers and people out in the community, when we come home, we have a chance if they see us as humans.
And I'm actually going to break the rules and give sort of a one cool thing instead, because it actually ties in very well to this. It's a great charity called Manifest Works. It's an organization that it's right here in Los Angeles, and it pairs formerly incarcerated people and gets them trained for jobs in the industry for film and television, which is exactly sort of what we need to do. So Manifest Works, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes for this episode. I want to thank our amazing panelists. I want to thank Hollywood Health and Society for putting this together. Thank you all very, very much.